A poor girl saves a man at the foot of the mountain, unaware, he's a billionaire and changes her life. The snow fell like quiet shards of glass the morning Emily Carter's life collided with destiny. The mountains of Blue Ridge were especially cruel in winter, burying everything in cold silence and leaving only the brave, or the desperate, wandering the lonely trails. Emily was both. At 23, she had learned more about survival than most people twice her age. She was used to cold, used to hunger, used to walking miles to collect fallen branches she could sell for a few dollars to the local lodge. But she was not used to seeing a man lying half-conscious at the base of a mountain slope, his body bruised, his coat torn, and his breath barely visible in the freezing air. Something about that moment, the stillness, the fear, the raw humanity, gripped her in a way nothing ever had. It felt like the universe had paused, waiting to see what she would do. Before the story continues, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of helping strangers, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts. Emily dropped the bundle of wood she had collected and rushed toward the injured man. Her boots slid on the thin layer of ice, and her hands trembled from cold and shock as she reached his side. His face was roughened by stubble, handsome in a rugged way, but marked by deep scrapes as if he had fallen from somewhere high. His chest rose and fell slowly, too slowly, and a faint stain of blood spread across his ribs. He looked like he had been through something terrible. She had no idea who he was. She only knew he was alive, and that if she didn't act now, he wouldn't remain that way much longer. Emily lived in a small cabin nearby, a cabin barely holding itself together after years of storms, patched roofs, and her mother's old repairs. Her mother had died 2 winters ago, leaving Emily alone with debts, unpaid property taxes, and a life she was still learning to face without guidance. But the one thing her mother had given her that never faded was compassion. That morning, when she saw the man lying helpless at the base of the mountain, she felt her mother's voice in her heart, urging her to help. The man's fingers twitched weakly, as if trying to grasp onto life. Emily removed her own thin jacket despite the cold, placing it over his chest to preserve whatever body heat he had left. Then she hooked her arms beneath his shoulders and struggled to pull him up, inch by inch. Her breath shook with every effort, her legs nearly giving out, but somehow she managed to drag him along the snowy trail toward her cabin. It took more strength than she had, but adrenaline, mixed with fear and purpose, fueled her. Inside the cabin, she lit the small iron stove, warming the room as fast as she could. She laid him on her only bed, the one her mother had once slept in, and rummaged through the old wooden chest for supplies. She found a cloth, a small bottle of antiseptic, and some herbs she had learned to use when no medicine was affordable. His wounds looked severe, deep cuts, bruises across his ribs, and an exhaustion that suggested he had been wandering for hours. She cleaned the dirt around his injuries, wincing each time he let out a faint, pained breath. The hours passed slowly. Emily checked his temperature, replaced cold cloths with warm ones, and whispered small prayers over him. She didn't know who he was or what had brought him to this part of the mountains. But she knew he needed her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt needed too. When he finally stirred, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains, casting a soft amber glow through the cracked windows. Emily had fallen asleep in a chair beside him, her hair messy and her clothes still damp from the snow. The man opened his eyes slowly, confusion clouding his expression. He didn't recognize where he was. He didn't recognize the girl watching over him. But he recognized warmth, and safety, and the strange comfort of being alive. He couldn't speak much, only whisper a few hoarse words, but Emily didn't push for answers. She only told him to rest, that he was safe, and that whatever had happened to him, he wouldn't face it alone. She fed him warm broth, lifted him gently whenever he needed to sit, and stayed awake most nights to make sure his fever didn't rise again. Though she was exhausted, there was something peaceful about caring for him, something healing for her, too. Days passed, and strength slowly returned to him. Emily learned his first name, Michael, but nothing more. He avoided speaking about his life, his past, or what had brought him to the mountains. She sensed pain behind his eyes, the kind that went deeper than injuries on the skin. She didn't pry. The cabin, fragile as it was, became a temporary sanctuary for them both. Michael watched her as she chopped wood outside, her breath rising in white clouds, her face flushed from effort. He noticed how she took only small portions of food and kept the larger share for him, even though she already looked thin from hardship. Her kindness wasn't forced. It was simply who she was. As the snow began to melt and signs of spring touched the mountains, Michael could finally walk on his own. Strength returned to his voice. His eyes looked clearer, his steps more steady. Emily felt relieved, proud even, to see him recovering. But part of her was quietly afraid. She knew he would leave soon, and she wasn't ready for the silence his absence would bring. One morning, as the sunlight filtered through the trees, Michael stood outside the cabin, hands in his coat pockets. Emily had mended the coat for him, stitching the torn edges with the only thread she had. He looked at the cabin, then at her, as if memorizing everything, and she realized something she had tried to ignore: she had grown attached to him. Not out of romance, but out of connection. Two lost souls had shared a small corner of the world, and now that time was ending. Michael thanked her with a quiet voice that carried more weight than she could explain. He said he would return. He promised it. But Emily had grown up surrounded by broken promises, from people, from life, from everything that once felt secure. She nodded, but she did not believe him. She watched him walk back toward the trail, a faint ache settling in her chest. She assumed she would never see him again. What Emily didn't know was that Michael Hale wasn't just a hiker who had gotten lost or a traveler passing through the mountains. He was one of the richest entrepreneurs in the country, a billionaire known for his real estate empire and private tech ventures. But after a devastating personal tragedy the year before, one that had shattered his family and nearly pushed him to the edge, Michael had left everything behind in search of clarity, solitude, and perhaps a reason to live again. His fall on the mountain had been partly an accident, partly the result of exhaustion and grief weighing on him. Emily hadn't just saved his life. She had saved his soul. 2 weeks after Michael left, Emily's world started collapsing again. The county delivered a final notice: the cabin, the land, her mother's last piece of legacy, everything was being seized to cover unpaid property taxes. Emily tried to negotiate, tried to plead, tried to gather enough money doing odd jobs, but the amount was too large. The deadline too close. Soon, she would be homeless, with nowhere to go and no family left. On the morning the officials arrived to take her home, Emily stood by the cabin door with her few belongings packed in a small duffel bag. Her hands shook as she looked around the place that held every memory of her childhood. The faded photographs, the dented stove, the chair where her mother once read her bedtime stories. She felt helpless, defeated, and painfully alone. Then a black SUV rolled up the trail, an unfamiliar sight on those rural, rocky roads. The car door opened, and Emily's breath caught when she saw him, Michael, clean-shaven, well-dressed, and standing tall with a quiet confidence she had never seen in him before. Behind him were 2 more cars, and behind those, county officials suddenly shifting uneasily as they whispered among themselves. Michael walked toward her with a look that combined both gratitude and determination. For a moment, Emily wondered if she was dreaming. But when he reached her, she saw the truth written plainly across his expression: he had come back, just like he promised. He spoke to the officials briefly, showing them documents and signatures, and within minutes the situation completely reversed. Not only had the property taxes been paid in full, but the land title had been secured in Emily's name permanently, free of debt, free of risk. Emily stood there stunned, unable to process what was happening. She tried to ask how, why, what he was doing, but Michael gently explained everything: that he was not just a traveler. Summer slowly folded into autumn, painting the Blue Ridge Mountains in amber, rust, and gold, and in those shifting seasons, Emily found herself learning how change could be breathtaking rather than terrifying. For most of her life, change had meant loss, losing her mother, losing their savings, losing stability, losing hope. But now, each change felt like a blessing she never dared to dream of. The cabin, once cold, broken, and nearly taken away, had become a sanctuary again, restored with warmth, electricity, and running water. Yet even with the fresh paint, new wooden beams, and a porch that creaked less than before, Emily held on to the details that mattered: her mother's rocking chair, the quilt she had sewn years ago, and the old Bible she kept on the shelf. The cabin was no longer a place she was trapped in, but a place she could build from. Michael visited often, though never in a way that intruded on her new world. He came when he could, arriving in simple clothes that made him look like the mountain traveler she had first found, humble, quiet, grateful. In those moments, they found comfort in small rituals, sharing coffee on the porch at sunrise, taking slow walks through the woods behind the cabin, and sometimes sitting in silence, letting the stillness between them speak where words fell short. Emily never treated Michael like a billionaire. She never asked anything of him except honesty, and he found that deeply grounding. In her presence, he wasn't a wealthy businessman or a public figure, he was simply a man trying to find purpose again. As months passed, Emily continued her nursing studies, discovering a natural gift for caring for others, just as she had cared for him. Her instructors praised her empathy, her precision, and her quiet strength. She took on part-time shifts at a small clinic in town, where patients looked to her with the same trust Michael once had on that cold mountain morning. With each exam she passed, each patient she helped, she felt her mother's memory moving with her, guiding her still. But change, even when it is good, can stir fear. Emily often worried the life she was building was fragile, that one unexpected moment could erase everything she had gained. She kept her heart guarded, unsure of how someone like her, once poor, once overlooked, once broken, could stand beside a man like Michael, whose world was built of skyscrapers and powerful decisions. She admired him, yes, and she cared for him deeply, but she quietly believed she was not enough for someone who lived so high above the world she knew. Michael sensed this insecurity, though she never voiced it. He saw the way she avoided conversations about his business, how she grew shy when he mentioned taking her to new places or introducing her to people in his circle. He didn't push her, he simply continued showing up. With every visit, every gesture of reassurance, every moment of grounding simplicity, he hoped she would understand that he valued her not because of what she could offer him, but because of who she already was. Their connection deepened in those subtle, meaningful ways that only time can build. Michael found himself smiling again, genuinely, effortlessly, something he had not done since the tragedy that once hollowed him. Emily gave him a reason to return to the world, not by replacing what he lost, but by reminding him that life, though unpredictable and cruel at times, could also be gentle and generous. One cool evening, near the end of autumn, Michael arrived at the cabin carrying something that made Emily's breath catch, not because of its value, but because of what it represented. He had found a sketch her mother once made years ago, a charcoal drawing of the cabin during winter. He framed it beautifully, placing it against polished wood with a glass pane that made the old artwork look renewed. Emily felt her heart swell in a way she hadn't expected. It was not an extravagant gift. It was something far more meaningful, proof that he saw her, understood her, and cherished the pieces of her past that shaped her. Time continued its slow, steady rhythm. Emily completed her first year of studies with honors. She earned scholarships that covered her tuition, not because of Michael's influence but because of her own hard work. She volunteered at the mountain clinic, cared for sick children, comforted elderly patients, and grew more confident by the day. Michael expanded some of his projects into rural health accessibility, inspired by Emily's dedication, and although she didn't realize it, her light was influencing his world in profound ways. Though they moved in different spheres, hers filled with textbooks, scrubs, and patience, his with investors, conference calls, and high-rise offices, they always returned to each other. Their connection became a quiet, steady bond, like a river carving its way gently through the land. It wasn't the loud, dramatic kind of love found in movies. It was slow, patient, healing, two hearts learning, cautiously at first, that they were safer together than apart. Winter came again. Not as harsh as the one that nearly claimed Michael's life, but cold enough to remind them of the day their paths crossed. Snow dusted the porch as Emily set 2 mugs of cocoa on the railing, waiting for Michael, who had called earlier and said he was on his way. She wrapped herself in the thick coat he had bought her last Christmas, feeling warmer than she ever had in years. She watched the road, expecting headlights to appear through the trees. Instead, she heard footsteps behind her. Michael had walked the trail instead of driving, smiling through the cold with a look that softened as he approached her. There was something different about him that night, an emotion he wasn't disguising, a certainty he was no longer hiding. He stood there for a moment, taking in the cabin glowing softly with warm light, the mountains rising behind it, and Emily waiting for him with hope in her eyes. He realized then that he had found what he didn't know he was searching for when he first came to the mountains. Peace. Home. A future. Emily felt the air shift as he stepped closer, and though he didn't speak, she understood something profound was settling between them. Not a confession, not a sudden declaration, but a truth that had been growing quietly with every passing season. They needed each other. Not out of dependence, but out of choice. Out of love built naturally, gently, through shared kindness and healing. As snow began to fall again, lightly, softly, as if blessing their story, Emily realized that the mountain that once symbolized struggle and survival now symbolized something entirely different. It was the place where her life began again. Where she saved a stranger without knowing she was also saving herself. Where she found purpose, strength, hope, and a man who would walk beside her no matter how hard the world became. And Michael, standing in the cold beside the woman who brought him back from the edge, felt an overwhelming gratitude for the moment that tore him down just to lead him to her. The fall that nearly ended his life became the rise that reshaped it entirely. In that quiet winter night, 2 souls who had once been lost found a home not in a building, or land, or wealth, but in each other. Their story didn't end with grand gestures or dramatic moments. It continued instead with shared mornings, warm words, gentle encouragement, and a bond that grew stronger with every passing day. Kindness had brought them together. Love would keep them there.